This frame represents one of the most expensive seconds in modern federal enforcement history. On one side, a federal narrative of a violent threat and defensive fire. On the other, a 37-year-old ICU nurse with no criminal record and a legally issued permit to carry. For those who support the mission of federal enforcement, this is a story of tactical breakdown. For those who oppose it, it is a story of systemic failure. To understand what happened to Alex Pretti, we have to look past the headlines and deconstruct the architecture of the encounter itself, analyzing the hidden mechanics of the system. Whether you believe in the badge or the Bill of Rights, the evidence being discussed here challenges long-standing assumptions about what the law calls objective reasonableness. Why this encounter unfolded the way it did requires examining the environment in which it occurred. In the weeks leading up to the incident, Minneapolis experienced a sustained escalation in federal law enforcement activity following multiple high-profile operations. This was not a routine policing posture. Under what was publicly described as Operation Metro Surge, federal units typically assigned to border interdiction and high-risk warrants were deployed into residential urban areas. Urban surge operations carry a unique risk profile. Agents trained for high-threat interdiction environments are placed into civilian-dense settings where the behavioral norms of the population differ sharply from border or fugitive contexts. Public reporting from early 2026 indicates a substantial increase in federal funding allocated toward urban tactical surge operations. That expansion included the deployment of BORTAC units, the elite tactical arm of the Border Patrol, into a city already under significant emotional strain following the January death of Renee Nicole Good. The psychological climate at the time has been widely described as tense, reactive, and hypervigilant. On the morning of the incident, the intersection of 26th and Nicollet was a pressure zone. For the agents involved, the objective was the execution of a federal warrant. For Alex Pretti, the objective appears to have been accountability. In early bystander recordings, Pretti's hands appear occupied by a smartphone, documenting events from a distance witnesses later described as non-interfering. This distinction is foundational in federal civil rights law. Lawful possession does not equal threat. Documentation does not equal interference. The shift from observation to intervention happens in a heartbeat. A young woman documenting the scene nearby is forcibly shoved by an agent and falls hard to the asphalt. Alex Pretti doesn't reach for a weapon, he reaches for his values. As an ICU nurse, his instinct is to move toward the injured, not away from them. He steps into the gray zone, placing his body between the fallen observer and the advancing federal unit. In his hand, he isn't clutching a firearm, he is holding his smartphone like a shield, documenting the encounter in a desperate bid for accountability. His arms are open, his posture is wide. It is the universal body language of a man trying to de-escalate a crisis through sheer presence. To a movement specialist, this isn't an act of aggression, it is an act of intercession. It is the moment a healer decided that someone else's safety was worth his own risk. But in the high-pressure environment of Operation Metro Surge, the system didn't see a protector, it saw an interference. The response is a low-level use of force, chemical irritant. To understand what follows, it is critical to understand the physiological effects of that agent. Federal agencies currently use high-concentration oleoresin capsaicin spray with major capsaicinoid levels capable of inducing immediate involuntary reactions. High-concentration OC spray causes blepharospasm, an uncontrollable muscular response in which the eyelids forcibly close and remain shut. It also triggers acute respiratory distress as the mucous membranes swell, creating the sensation of suffocation. In these moments, Pretti isn't just a subject resisting arrest, he is a human being experiencing the biological terror of being buried alive while standing up, blinded, gasping for air, and reaching out for a world he can no longer see. At this stage, the perceived danger shifts away from the individual himself and toward the hypothetical possibility of a weapon being accessed, while multiple agents converge. Multiple agents achieve full physical restraint. Pretti is prone on the ground. This is where the available visual evidence begin to diverge. The sequence that follows has become central to ongoing legal analysis and potential federal liability. Once restraint is achieved, federal training doctrine emphasizes containment, stabilization, and medical evaluation. The role of lethal force is sharply narrowed at this stage. An agent, identified here as the agent in gray, reaches into the restraint cluster and performs a trained disarmament maneuver. The firearm is located, secured, and removed from Pretti's control. This is the moment at which the previously asserted imminent threat appears to cease. Disarmament is not a symbolic act. In legal analysis, it is a threshold event. Once a weapon is secured, justification for lethal force must be re-evaluated in real time. What happens next is critical. The agent who secures the weapon stands up and moves away, holding the firearm by the grip and directing it toward the ground, creating clear physical separation between the weapon and the restrained subject. At this point, Alex Pretti is unarmed, blinded, and pinned beneath multiple agents. The weapon is no longer within his reach. The tactical objective of neutralization appears to have been completed. According to widely cited federal training standards, once a weapon is secured and a subject is restrained, force should transition immediately toward de-escalation and medical evaluation. That transition does not appear to occur here. Let's pause and restate what can be observed. The subject is restrained. The weapon is no longer in his possession. The agent who removed it has created physical distance. These are not interpretations. These are observable conditions. Under the Supreme Court's ruling in Graham v. Connor, force must be objectively reasonable based on the threat present at that specific moment. The standard does not permit the use of lethal force based on a threat that existed earlier but no longer does. This is the fulcrum of the entire analysis. The law evaluates force as a snapshot, not a memory. A separate agent, positioned over the restrained subject, draws his service weapon. From his vantage point, the disarmament is apparently visible. He appears to see his teammate moving away with the firearm. Despite this, he fires. Multiple rounds are discharged. In high-stress environments, phenomena such as sympathetic discharge are documented. In legal analysis, however, the passage of even a few seconds can be decisive. If the firearm had already been secured, the question becomes unavoidable. What imminent threat justified lethal force after that point? As a nurse, Alex Pretti's professional life centered on what trauma specialists call the golden hour, the critical window in which immediate intervention can save lives. It is a haunting irony that the man who spent his career racing to save others from the brink of death was left on the asphalt. The case of Alex Pretti is not only about a single morning in Minneapolis. It raises broader questions about the financial, legal, and systemic risk of enforcement strategies that may be operating faster than their own safeguards.